Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Samurai Joinery Workshop build series. And here's a quick update on the shed itself, with my dad on the digger clearing and flattening the ground around the workshop to finish off the surrounding area. This series follows the full journey, building the workshop, the furniture and the systems that will eventually make Samurai Joinery a fully functioning space. If you're into woodworking, workshop builds and seeing real progress over time, consider subscribing and following along. Quick recap before we continue. In the last episode I dry fitted the outfeed table frame to check all the joinery, spacing and overall proportions. Everything came together really well, so in this episode we can start locking things in and moving the build forward. Next step was drilling the holes in the bottom of the legs to take the levelers. This will let me fine tune the height later on and make sure the outfeed table sits dead flat once it's in position. It's a small detail, but it makes a big difference, especially on a workshop floor that's never perfectly level. I creep up on the final hole size using a few progressively bigger drill bits. If you start with a large bit straight away, it can sometimes wander and end up off centre, so this keeps everything nice and accurate. I've knocked a T-nut in with a hammer, and the levelers just screw straight into that. Before glue up, I give all the components a final sand with 120 grit and break the edges so they're no longer sharp. It helps prevent chip out and leaves everything soft and smooth to the touch. During the dry fit I noticed a few spots that needed filling. That's mostly just from nail holes left over from breaking down the pallets earlier on. I quickly hit all those filled spots with the orbital sander just before starting the frame glue up. For the glue up, I slow things right down and focus on getting every component seated properly in the joins. I'm not worrying about square at this stage. The priority is making sure everything is fully honed and sitting naturally where it wants to be. As I go, I also keep an eye on any glue squeeze out and clean it up straight away with a wet rag. It's much easier to deal with it now than trying to scrape it off once it's dried. Occasionally I'll use a mallet to gently knock a joint home if it's a little bit tight. Once glue's added, joints that were fitting nicely during the dry fit can sometimes tighten up slightly, so it's just about easing everything together without forcing it. Once the whole frame is together and the glue is on, I then check the frame corner to corner with a tape measure to see where it's sitting. From there, I make small adjustments as needed to bring it back to square, and only once I'm happy with that do I start bringing the clamps on. Taking the time here makes all the difference, because once it's clamped and the glue sets, whatever shape it's in is the shape it's staying in. Just a quick note, I did put another clamp on that other rail even though it's not shown here. I was a bit short on clamps at the time and had to go hunt another one down. Once the glue had set, I moved on to staining the frame. I'm using a walnut coloured stain here, applied with a foam brush. This is actually the first time I've used a foam brush for staining, so I was taking my time and getting a feel for how it behaved. One thing I noticed pretty quickly is that the stain tends to run a lot, especially on the vertical faces. At first I tried using the foam brush to clean up the runs as I went, but it didn't quite work as well as I'd hoped. Because of that, the first coat ended up a little heavier in places. During the first coat, I focused mainly on getting full coverage and working the stain into the timber. Pine and pallet wood absorb stain quite unevenly in places, so I wasn't too worried about it looking perfect at this stage. So once it had dried, I spent a bit more time sanding everything back to even it out. I started with 80 grit to knock things down, then worked through to a 240 grit to get everything smooth again. The sanding here isn't aggressive, it's more about levelling everything out. I'm just taking down the high spots and smoothing out the surface. That sanding step between coats made a big difference, both in flattening out any runs and in getting the surface ready for the second coat. After that, I applied a second coat of stain, again working my way around the frame methodically and keeping a closer eye on consistency this time. On the second coat, I changed things up slightly and used a clean white rag to wipe off any runs as I went. I found that doing it this way gave me much more even coverage and a more consistent colour overall. By the end of the second coat, the colour really started to come together and the frame began to take on the look I was aiming for. These final photos show how the walnut stain brings out the character in the timber, while still keeping everything clean and refined. For the tabletop itself, I found a really good black coated plywood called form ply from the hardware store. The surface is incredibly smooth, which makes it perfect for an outfeed table. Everything just glides straight over the top. I'm cutting the tabletop out of this form ply using a track saw. With big sheets like this, I much prefer the track saw. It's safer, more accurate, and a lot less awkward than trying to wrestle it through the table saw. I'm building the top up with a few layers of plywood here to thicken it out to around 35mm. That extra thickness gives me something solid to add the trim to and really finish the edge properly. I cut the strips for the tabletop build up on the table saw, and while it was set up, I also ripped down the hardwood strips that I'll use later on for the trim. I cut the build-up pieces along with the table trim on the miter saw first. This prepares them to fit to the underside of the tabletop. When I'm fixing the build-up to the underside of the tabletop, I start by running a bead of liquid nails along each piece and spreading it out evenly. I'm not trying to line everything up perfectly flush at this stage. Instead, I keep the build-up slightly proud all the way around. This gives me the option to come back later with the trimmer and clean everything up perfectly flush once it's fixed. Once the pieces are in position, I fire in a few brad nails to hold everything exactly where I want it. This is done while the adhesive grabs. The brad nails aren't doing the structural work here. They're really just acting as clamps so nothing moves. The reason I use liquid nails here is because it gives me a strong, slightly flexible bond across the whole surface. With something like this, when you're laminating layers together rather than relying on a tight joint, liquid nails works really well at filling any small gaps and keeping everything solid. It also gives me a bit more open time, which is handy when you're lining multiple pieces up and making sure they're sitting where you want them. If I need to make any small adjustments after the brads go in, I'll just use a mallet to knock things into place. Brad nails have a bit of flex in them, and you can still fine tune the position before everything fully locks in. As I was firing in the brads, I figured it was worth adding a few screws as well, just for some extra hold down while the glue sets. Flush trimming the build up is easily one of the most satisfying steps. A trim router makes quick work of it and leaves everything dead clean. By leaving everything slightly proud earlier on, the router just follows the tabletop and cleans the edge up perfectly. It's a really controlled way to get a clean, consistent finish all the way around. Next step is putting miters on the trim. I cut the miters slightly oversized to start with and creep up on the fit by taking small cuts at a time until everything comes together cleanly. Straight after cutting the miters, I dry fit and tape the trim pieces in place before any glue goes on. This step's really important. It lets me check all the miters, make sure everything lines up properly, and confirm the fit before committing to glue. Once I'm happy with the dry fit, I glue the trim up and start fixing it in place. The brad nails hold the pieces exactly where I want them while I bring all the miters together. I work one piece at a time, applying glue evenly and bringing each section into place carefully so the miters come together cleanly. As I'm working my way around the top, I'm using some 1mm packers to space the trim slightly proud of the tabletop. That way, when everything's fixed, I can come back later with a flush trim bit on the router and clean it all up perfectly flush. Adding the trim really changes the look of the table. It hides the plywood edge and makes the whole thing feel more finished and intentional, rather than just a sheet of ply sitting on top. And once everything's lined up neatly, I add a few clamps wherever I can to keep the joints tight while the glue sets. Once the glue had set, I I came back and took the clamps off. I then filled all the brad nail holes with a hardwood coloured filler, and once that had dried I sanded everything back smooth to clean it all up. Next, I load the flush trim bit back into the router and trim the top of the hardwood edging flush with the form ply. That brings everything down perfectly level, leaving the tabletop nice and flat and smooth across the top. It always leaves a bit of a mess, so I keep the shop vac handy to clean up all the shavings and dust before moving on. And once all that's cleaned up, I grab some 180 grit sandpaper and lightly sand the edge to knock back any small imperfections left from the trim router. From there, it's just the same process on the underside, trimming the bottom of the hardwood edging flush with the build-up so everything else lines up cleanly. On this build up underneath, I can just use the orbital sander to smooth it out. There's no form ply here, so sanding regular plywood isn't an issue and it cleans up really nicely. As a final finishing step, I like to run a 45-degree chamfer bit around both top and bottom edges of the table. It's a small detail, but it really sharpens everything up and gives the table a much more professional, finished look. I like to run a slightly heavier chamfer on the underside of the table as well. It's a detail you often see in Japanese joinery. It keeps the top looking light while adding a bit more refinement underneath. The next step is fitting some steel L-shaped brackets onto the table frame. These will be used later on to secure the tabletop in place while still keeping everything aligned and solid. The final step in this assembly is fixing the frame to the tabletop. I flip the top upside down onto the assembly table, position the frame, and then screw through the brackets into the underside of the top to lock everything together. The last step here is putting the table in its final position, in front of the cabinet saw, exactly where I want it for outfeed. This table will be the heart of the joinery workshop, supporting everything I cut and letting material slide smoothly and safely as I work. That's it for this build. The outfeed table's in place and already doing exactly what it was built for. In part 4, I'll be moving back to the workshop build and assembling the next wall bay, and I'm going to be testing out pocket hole screws to see how they go for framing. If you're enjoying the series, make sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss out on the next one.